Welcome to the Thursday, June 20th, 2024 meeting of the Chappaqua Central School District Board of Education. The board has been in executive session since 6:30 this evening. Can I have a motion, please, to reopen the public meeting at 7:25?
I move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag.
Start. President's report. Good evening. I want to thank the community for coming out and voting to pass the budget on Tuesday. I want to thank Lisa Elsner for running a second smooth voting day. And for all of the volunteers who facilitated the election, the budget vote a second time. It was a second long day, and we are incredibly appreciative of the time that everybody put into it and incredibly appreciative of the community for coming out and supporting the budget. We had a wonderful Greeley graduation under the tent last weekend. It's always so exciting to celebrate these young adults on the cusp of their future and send them off onto new adventures. And I hope that our families celebrating yesterday had a happy and meaningful Juneteenth. These last couple of weeks of the year always seem to fly by, and I can never quite believe it's summer when it hits, but the thermometer is definitely making it clear this week. This is our last board business meeting of the school year. We've made an effort this year as a board and as a district to communicate more and more effectively and to be more available to meet with community members. We're going to continue to refine and push forward that work in 24-25 school year. One way to get involved is to join board committees. We repopulate our committees with community volunteers every other year, and this is a year that we will be accepting applications. So please keep your eyes open for an email later in the summer on how to apply for board committees. So on behalf of the board, we wish all of our families as well as our faculty and staff a wonderful, relaxing, and fun-packed summer. That's all I got.
Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over. Oh.
Yes, I would love to do 1.1.1. So 1.1.1 states, be it resolved that the Board of Education hereby ratifies the report of the June 18, 2024 school budget revote. So I will move 1.1.1. Can I have a second?
I will second.
Any questions? Favor?
Aye. Okay, so before Adam introduces our literacy consultants, I also would like to thank our community for supporting the budget this past Tuesday, and I want to extend my gratitude to Josh and to the Board of Education and the rest of our team up here for making the necessary adjustments to present a budget that we felt like worked for our community. And I'm just grateful we're able to plan forward with the resources that we feel like we need to be able to support our kids. Social. Helping to facilitate the budget vote. Their support has been tremendous this year, and I do want to express my gratitude. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. Adam. We've created a new format here, so it could be a facilitated discussion between the board and our program evaluators, and hopefully this will be a new way to do our work moving forward. That we feel would benefit everybody. So, Adam.
Thank you, Christine. I think we're a little close. You might have to turn off your mic. Is that your mic there? So you recognize Eleni and Patty from the RFP process that we engaged in. We actually engaged in two different RFP processes. The first one wasn't successful. The second one was. After the board interviewed several different consultant firms, you chose Theory and Practice, which is their firm to conduct a literacy audit, and they've done that over the last couple of months. I'll explain that process to you. So we're happy to have them here. They gave a preview to our faculty over Zoom this afternoon at about 4 o'clock, interrupted by our fire alarm, but we actually appreciate they continued the presentation in the courtyard outside, so we appreciate that. And they're here to give you an update with regard to their findings of their process. So thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to present our findings to you. As you know, my name is Eleni, and this is Patty.
So can I just ask, what is helpful to you in terms of the main questions that you're going through?
Just going to get into that. So you are welcome to ask questions at any time if you require clarification or if you have questions. At the same time, if you want to hold them to the end, that's fine. We were asked to kind of plan for about 15 minutes, not including questions. So we're going to jump in with really talking about participation, since you all know the background in our methodology. But if you want us to go back to any of that, we can. But we really want to focus this presentation on our findings, our recommendations, and then time for questions. So if that sounds good, we'll hop there. We did include background slides for you. So if you want to go back to that at any point, you can. But the goal of our study was really to apply the components of a research-based literacy program, look at those components in your program, and also examine the levers for effective implementation. And we were really pleased with the level of participation that we had in Chappaqua. We were able to get into all the schools, multiple site visits. More than anything, though, what stood out to us is that we really were able to corroborate things that were said in the surveys with interviews and our own observations visiting in the school. So we feel like not only the participation, but overall, there was a lot of triangulation between what we saw, which is important. Before we get into kind of the structure of the report and recommendations, we did want to pull out 3 key themes that came out across the study. Now, the report is obviously much more in depth than we're able to go into tonight, and the structure of the report is kind of based on components of a literacy program and levers for implementation, and that's what you'll hear in a minute. But these 3 themes really stood out to us while we were here. The first is synergy, and I know that's sometimes an overused word, but that really stood out to us here. Chappaqua Central School District is a community of really dynamic, passionate educators who are excited about creation, collaboration, working together, building something. The pursuit of excellence we saw everywhere. It was evident across buildings, across classrooms. The number one thing faculty said that they really loved about working in Chappaqua is what they got out of working with their peers and their colleagues and how that elevated their practice. The dedication of the faculty and the staff was evidenced kind of everywhere we went, but especially in their willingness to participate and advocate for what they thought would improve the program for their children, their students. All around, we just got a very strong sense that this is a learning organization, that there's a lot of opportunity to kind of make big things happen here. And I think connected to that synergy, change is obviously a big theme. While there hasn't been a lot of change in terms of key programs, right? The key writing and reading program you have in place is the same, and you still continue to have really high performance on standardized assessments. On the other hand, there have been a lot of recent changes or initiatives that are underway, and overwhelmingly, most of the participants really did share that they felt like the literacy program was still in a state of flux, kind of incomplete, not quite there yet. But change was not framed as a negative thing, which I think is really powerful. I think sometimes in a school or a district, you get this impression that any change is bad. Again, I think kudos to the folks you have here. The spirit of it was not only is change inevitable, but it's necessary and it could be a really good thing. We did hear a little bit of feedback about how different, how change can feel positive and how it can feel negative, the importance of communication and transparency. But overall, there was a really strong appetite for continued evolution of the literacy program and for it to continue to align with the body of research on reading and writing. So that was exciting to see. And I think that appetite for change, our impression is that it really has to do with alignment. And that's not news to your team. The Science of Reading team did a SWOT analysis, and alignment was one of the main things that came up for them when it comes to the program. But again, majority of faculty, as well as parent participants, really interested to see the district further overhaul the literacy program, kind of continue to evolve on the trajectory that you're on. And part of that, at least from the faculty perspective, really had to do with a lot has been added, but not much has been taken away. So faculty are really eager to see a more streamlined literacy program, more streamlined approach to assessment. They're really eager to see some kind of changes to some of the structures, maybe the schedule to ensure greater outcomes, and so that they really can have deeper, more meaningful instruction. There's also, given all of these themes, I guess we open with this to remind you that, you already have a lot of considerable strength in this district, and our recommendation would be to kind of build on this momentum. There was a lot of eager participation. The faculty are excited about all the work you're already doing, so you're in a really good place to kind of be mindful of the momentum that you have and kind of keep it going. As I mentioned, we organized our main recommendations in kind of 6 categories, but they really do overlap quite a bit. And again, in greater depth in the report. But we wanted to start with the notion of developing a philosophy of literacy. Literacy is a really complex and nuanced topic, and we really believe that every member of this organization needs to have kind of a shared idea, an aligned kind of explicit approach to what you think about how children learn to read and write, and that should really be agnostic of any particular curriculum. So we heard over and over again that the school and the district is committed to the science of reading, but we didn't get a sense that there's a shared idea of what that really means and what that should look like in your district, which is understandable, I think. You're on a journey towards continuing to kind of professionally develop your team, but I think it would be really important at this moment in time to pause and define that before you think about programming. We did find that, the district's kind of philosophy or identity around literacy really is tied to the Teachers College Readers and Writers Workshop. That's kind of at its core. And we heard a lot about significant supplementation from faculty and staff to the units of study. We heard a lot about modifications to better align it to the science of reading or to better support specific students in class. We also heard a lot about the recent revisions to that curriculum, which were definitely intended to better implement phonics instruction. We reviewed that. We did see more phonics instruction. We did see, in the revised units, more emphasis on culturally responsive pedagogy and instruction. But often the examples of that in the revised units of study aren't necessarily aligned with best practice. So while there's like a move in that direction, even the faculty sort of saw it as an attempt to align, but it's sort of misaligned at its core. So it doesn't really feel like it's aligned with the other kind of efforts you're making towards having a more research-based approach. So we believe that kind of next step is a deeper dive into the research, make sure everyone at every level feels like they really understand it, and then draft that philosophy and use that as your North Star as you're continuing to plan.
With that in mind, we do recommend that the district create a multi-year plan to replace the units of study, both for reading and writing. We know based on our conversations that this is not what some teachers and leaders in the district are hoping to hear, but we will say that the majority of the adult participants in the study, both parents and faculty, are ready and eager for this change. Because they want to be in tighter alignment with the science of reading. And we want to say again that the changes that have been implemented over the past several years, many of them are in alignment with the science of reading, but they're attached to something at its core that pedagogically is not representative of best practice or gold standard of curriculum. So having said that, just some thoughts on how you might go about doing that. We heard a lot of generalizations about alternatives to the units of study that are not necessarily representative of the options that are available to you. So for example, there's a concern that if you give up Reader's Workshop, students would no longer feel the joy of reading or see themselves as readers. We don't see those as outcomes that are exclusive to the units of study, and we also don't see that students who learn under the units of study actually experience that. So there are curricula that have students reading out of a textbook every day, but those wouldn't be a good fit in your district. And there are plenty of curricula out there that prioritize using high quality texts that are some of the same texts that we saw in the hands of students and teachers during our visits. So as you explore other products, we would really encourage you to focus on pedagogy that you've outlined in your philosophy of literacy over products. So don't try to avoid the temptation to compare a new potential product to the units of study, but instead compare it to check it with alignment to your philosophy. Pedagogy also includes culturally responsive pedagogy, which we see as a particular area of weakness of units of study, including the version. There are a number of things that we're not going to recommend a program to you. That's something that you all should do. However, we have included in the report some guiding principles that we thought might be helpful. So one example is to consider the role of knowledge building and language comprehension. The approach in the reading units of study is to emphasize comprehension skills, but we would ask that you consider deepening knowledge building that's happening so that when students are reading, researching, writing about what they read, they're doing that about a topic that's really worthy of the time that's dedicated to it. We don't think that you would do this because you would have done it by now. Resist the urge to overcorrect. We are seeing in other districts that they're swinging the other way, going all the way to knowledge building curricula or going all the way to just teaching phonics. And your district has shown good judgment in not doing that. The word that came up most often in our conversation with teachers was alignment. It came up again and again, and I know Lydia mentioned it as a theme. We wanted to kind of outline some of the different types of alignment that came up from teachers. So aligning instruction across curricula. So for example, in a second grade classroom, a class might be using the reading units of study, which doesn't purport to be a phonics instruction program, but does include phonics practice and assessment. They would also be using phonics first. Some students who are receiving tier 2 and tier 3 services might be using foundations. All of that is not necessarily aligned with each other. And what's happening now is teachers are in the position of having to figure out that alignment. And we know that teachers already make thousands of decisions a day. And this is sort of creating an extra layer, an extra barrier to high-level implementation. We heard a lot that teachers are hoping for alignment in terms of how you teach grammar and mechanics. There was a lot of hope that the implementation of benchmarking grades 3 to 5 would be a solution for that grade band. Unfortunately, we did not hear a lot of positive feedback from teachers on that, so that might be worth taking a second look at. That wouldn't be a high priority recommendation because if and when you do adopt a new program, it will likely have its own grammar mechanics scope and sequence built into it. We also thought that there was an opportunity for improved alignment regarding communication between the board, district leaders, and parents and faculty. But it sounds like from Hillary's opening statements, you already have been working on that and plan to prioritize it for next year. We had the opportunity to see a lot of students engaged in writing. When we came to visit for observations, we saw that writing is really prioritized, growing writers. We also saw that teachers are teaching with a good amount of fidelity to the writer's workshop model. And then in our conversations with teachers following our observations, we heard some of the common pitfalls or challenges that they were facing in implementing that program. So teachers, and we concur, believe that there needs to be a program with more scaffolding. So for example, in Writer's Workshop, we saw a couple of classes where teachers were doing exactly as instructed in the manual, where they were having the class flash draft an essay across 1 or 2 class periods. What happens when you do that is there's not as much of a focus on structure or quality. It's on getting a quantity of text down on paper. And then you'll have some students wind up with pages and pages of text, and some students wind up with a few sentences. And then you've created a logistical challenge where now the students all have a different set of needs that the teacher has to try to remediate. So a different, more research-aligned approach would be to break the writing process down into more manageable steps with more instruction and guided practice. So for example, if you were writing a persuasive essay, pick a subtopic, create a thesis. This is how you outline an introductory paragraph, and really go for a high quality of writing, maybe less quantity, but a high quality at every step of the process. Also, again, we thought that there's an opportunity to integrate content learning with writing instruction. So in the writer's workshop, a 5th grade class might be writing about the merits of serving chocolate milk in schools. Rather than a topic like that, which certainly every 5th grader would have an opinion on, what if they were to write an opinion essay based on something that they're learning about in their social studies curriculum? And so for students to be able to do that well, starting in, say, the middle of 2nd or the beginning of 3rd grade, a focus on sentence level skills in K through 2nd grade would be really helpful, including transcription skills, which is handwriting. And then again, you would probably, if you chose to think about a different writing program, grammar instruction would be. We also heard a lot about assessment. There seems to be a strong emphasis on assessment in the district when it comes to ELA. So we heard from district leadership that there's a desire to move towards data-informed decision-making, which we agree is good practice. And we also heard from teachers a desire to sort of have a better, a more manageable suite of assessments that they're using, and for each assessment that they use to have utility for their instruction. So we would encourage you to look at the time spent on assessment and really think about where there are gaps and where there are overlaps. We think there's, again, streamlining. We love efficiency. There's, again, the potential to streamline the number of assessments that are being used. There are also some assessments that are being used that are not aligned with the science of reading that we would encourage you to replace, and we'll go into detail in the report. We also have a couple of suggestions for something that might be a little bit more manageable time-wise. And we also wanted to talk a little bit about summative and formative assessment. So currently the district does a lot of summative assessment. So that's measuring how well students are doing compared to mastery, norms, grade level expectations, and standards. And formative assessment is also a really important part of instruction, of high quality instruction. So formative assessment is the teacher's ability to check in to see how students are doing and how well they've internalized the learning from the day. Formative assessment is very challenging in the workshop model. So there were a couple of times when we asked teachers, well, how do you know if your students understood what they did and what you taught them that day? And teachers are really relying on their understanding of each student. And we're sure that in a lot of cases they do that really well, but again, that's a really heavy lift for teachers.
Our last recommendation is to really consider change management and professional development. We recognize that a great deal of energy can be kind of created when you receive a report with a pile of recommendations. But we also know that this district really understands how to implement system-wide professional development, and they really, I think, understand how to plan change thoughtfully and meaningfully, and that requires time and it requires saturation. So we really, encourage you to think about, ensuring that you have the right amount of time to research all your options and different components, that you choose wisely, you provide professional development, you pilot initiatives, you collaborate. That's what we saw in like all the materials that were shared to us. from the district already. So we know that that's kind of baked into what you do, a really thoughtful approach to change management. And we just encourage this community to really lean into that again. We're really energized by this report. I'm sure lots of folks will be, and we do hope that you get started, working on this right away, but we really want to make sure that you make space for learning-oriented leadership, professional development at every level of the organization, and create a thoughtful multi-year implementation plan that really provides for, again, a supportive environment, collaboration with purpose, ongoing learning and growth, transparency, and clear communication. Those are some of the things that lots of folks really appreciated about this district, and they're things that folks would like to see continue. And so as you look to implement change, we really, again, believe that this district is very well poised. You're on your journey, to ensuring that your literacy program is aligned with the research. And we hope you'll really lean into this exciting moment, use what you have here in terms of momentum and capability to take these recommendations and proceed with them. And with that, we're happy to answer questions.
So I think I have a lot of questions, but I'll
Please.
start with one, which is, it's sounding to me, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you've said. So what you evaluated was sort of a patchwork of programming based in TC and then supplemented with the phonics program, the grammar program, all these other programs. And what I'm hearing from you is that those programs that we've built this sort of eclectic pedagogy may not be completely aligned with each other, that in our efforts to cover all of the pieces of literacy that we need to cover, there may be conflict between those programs where they're not. Is that sort of a fair? And so what I'm hearing is that without recommending a specific program that we should be looking to, it's your recommendation that not only that we phase out the TC, but that we phase out essentially all of this with the idea of a more holistic program that would address all of these things. Is that a fair understanding of what you're saying? Because otherwise, my concern is that if we just phase out the TC and bring in something else for that piece of it, we're going to potentially still have the alignment issues that you're seeing with the current situation.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We can't answer it because it'll really depend on what program you choose and how comprehensive that program is. We do want to set expectations. There is not a perfect program out there. If there was, you would already be using it. So it is likely that anything you choose will not perfectly meet your needs and you will still need some supplementation, but we couldn't say what that would be right now because we don't know what program that you'll choose. So there are some programs that do knowledge building and reading comprehension really well, and maybe need a little bit of an extra boost in phonemic awareness, or there might be a program that doesn't do writing as well. So I can say, no, we're not saying that you should throw everything out, but I think there's a need to have a greater understanding of the options and the spectrum and the amount of change that each one would require.
Can I add to that? I also think part of where you can find a little bit more alignment is in the specific phonics program. So currently what's being used in Tier 1 kind of classroom phonics instruction is different than what's being used for intervention. So it's not that you should throw out phonics instruction or this specific program. However, if you want alignment across all three, there are approaches that provide for that. So while you're thinking about phasing out Readers and Writers Workshop, you can also think about creating alignment there. And one thing that I think, we saw your district is really good at is finding the holes. So as Patty said, being able to identify once you choose where you need to supplement. But overall, we do believe that you could have fewer, much more aligned programs than you have right at this very moment.
Anything that we would phase in is being phased into our K-6 faculty, and that's a lot of teachers, right? And a lot of teachers who have been working with TC for a number of years and then who have also had to learn these other programs that we've, what do you recommend as useful, I guess, for facilitating that transition for our faculty? I know you said they're really excited about it, and that's awesome to hear, frankly, but it's still a lot, right?
Yeah.
It's still a lot to ask teachers to use a new program. You know, I know you've talked about a multi-year phase-in, but at the same time, if we're going to adopt a new program because we think it's better, we want to get it to our kids as soon as possible because we
Yes,
think it's better.
absolutely.
So I'm curious sort of what your recommendations are on how to do that.
We were worried about that too. So in our initial, I would say that was like a early hypothesis of this study was like, what is the appetite for change? And just to paraphrase someone from the Science of Reading team, they said, what we're doing now is really hard. And they're kind of doing it alone because they're figuring out, like almost every teacher we talk to is figuring out how to supplement the writing. Writing is really, really hard to teach. And so for every, everyone across every grade level to be approaching this, maybe with their colleagues, again, that's why they really love working with each other, but to be supplementing this program for missing pieces, that's a lot of work. And they're really proud of being a part of a district that is so committed to excellence. So they don't want to be behind the curve. So I think that's another, I mean, you really have that in your favor. So the one thing I would say, and I've heard this from teachers all over the place, here's what not to do. Try not to work with professional developers who were formerly really, really closely aligned with TC, because it feels like, well, it's an easy they kind of get what we're doing already. But I think what your faculty really want is to work with somebody who's spent their career in this area. And those are the people who are going to be able to find help you see what you can't see because you've all been doing this for a really long time. So that's the number one thing. So when you think about professional development, especially in a school and a district, it can feel like first step is always pick the program and then train them in the program. We would really recommend that you start with that idea of developing a philosophy of literacy, which would begin with just professional development on what does the research say, and maybe in your case, comparing and contrasting it with what's been done. One easy kind of lift to do that doesn't necessarily require external folks is using some of the high quality rubrics that we use for this study and having your folks go through that process of comparing what you have now to what is in some of these rubrics related to research-based literacy, being able to see why certain components of the program aren't working. And what I've seen is that when teachers get the chance to do that, they feel really validated because there are parts of this program that they have been modifying for their entire careers or have felt like it's my fault the kids aren't getting it. And when they go through this process of evaluating it through a rubric based on the research, it's really kind of exciting. So I think it's a heavy lift in the right direction. And again, we got the sense that folks feel like it's better to change now. We did survey just the Science of Reading team to ask them, would you advocate for really big changes right away? And it was some alarming number of people who were like, let's just do it. Because, kind of piecing it together over time is exhausting for them. And they recognize that. And I think they've gotten a lot of PD already. So they already feel like they understand this and they're ready to move. They've seen the progress with Phonics First. So they're really excited about things that they struggled with in terms of instruction before, kind of being more successful. So I think I would start there and really kind of hone in what are the components of a high quality literacy program, and then you can engage them in the process of evaluating different options, going to visit. They all said they want to go to other schools and see what's out there, see it in practice, compare and contrast, collaborate with each other. And then ultimately, I do think your leadership has to make the decision. You're never going to pick by consensus what programs you want to use. I do think that really should be an ultimate decision made by the leadership, but I think your faculty have a lot of really good ideas and are eager to kind of get engaged. So that's where I would start. Then you pick the program and you can train into it. And I would say time for saturation is really, really important. We don't learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. And time and time again, your faculty said that the most exciting thing about PD, even when you bring them really wonderful people, is when they get to sit with their colleagues and do something with that learning. And of course, you all know that as educators, right? That's what the kids are doing in the classroom all the time. You have to do something with the knowledge that you receive. So giving them opportunities to make it their own, to try a lesson, piloting, having time to collaborate is really, really important. And again, we've seen that the district does a really good job of that, but I would just remind you to support, your district leaders and building that in so that it doesn't feel rushed, because that's when I do think folks will feel like they haven't had a chance to figure it out.
I was curious on the philosophy of reading part. Like, what have you seen other places do that are really? I get the point about kind of like making it your own and kind of having people go through a process, but I'm curious if the more detailed report will actually have either some exemplars in there or some place to start from doing that. Because at the moment, it sort of sounds like you kind of home grow it, but I imagine there are some better ones and worse ones.
Well, we're not planning on including an exemplar in the report, but we do include some examples of some concepts that are important for literacy instruction that we're currently not seeing in your program. So for example, we talk a bit about the importance of direct instruction. The district should have a stance on the role that direct instruction plays on how children learn to read and write. Direct instruction doesn't just mean that the teacher spends time teaching. It includes that the teacher lays out the objective at the start of the lesson. Cognitive research tells us that that really helps students to learn. It includes that your stance should talk about, sorry, I'm creating a hiccup, should talk about the guided practice that should follow the instruction that happens and at what point you need students to move towards independence. So getting down to the nitty gritty of how children really learn how to read and write, broken down into things like, what's your stance on vocabulary? Should it be instructed on? How much assessment should it be? What should you be assessing for? So we do have some guidance in the report on what are some of the concepts that we think are.
I think also a way to think of it would be if you were in a 101 teaching children to read and write class in undergrad, what would be covered? It's completely agnostic of curriculum. And I think
Sure.
sometimes what happens in schools is you spend so much time using one approach or another, you kind of need help
Backing up a little bit.
backing up from
Yeah.
it. And what we saw was that, a lot of people said that they really enjoyed components of the Readers and Writers Workshop and would be worried about losing it. We did hear that. But then when we heard what they didn't like about it, it was actually all of the kind of research-based pitfalls of this particular kind of an approach. So I think, again, giving them the opportunity to think about how children learn how to read and write without thinking about specific components of would really, I think they would, I think the philosophy would very quickly write itself.
Just piggybacking off of that, I do want to say that I am really pleased and I do really appreciate how you mentioned the pursuit of excellence was very present amongst the teachers, the faculty in our district, and how the dedication and willingness to advocate for their students was very much alive, and that their appetite for continued evolution and for change is was really appreciated. And I'm so grateful actually to hear that about our teachers and our faculty in this district. I do want to say that I think it is really important, and how you mentioned about pedagogy versus product. It's one thing to say that they love phonics first, but it's another thing to say that we just love teaching phonics because we know that teaching phonics is going to produce outcome and is going to help our children be better readers and writers. So I think we really have to be sensitive and careful about where the focus is. And it's like, I know as you guys sitting across from us being the experts, and even though I'm a literacy specialist myself by training, I would not say that I am expert that's up to date as of today, right? Because I have been out of the classroom and I have been sort of out of the loop in terms of what is out there, what new research and what new curricula is out there. So I think it's really more important to think about what are, and correct me if I'm wrong, what, like looking at the pedagogy versus the actual, well, tell us, just give us a name, just tell us, because we're going to have families coming at us saying, my child is going to first grade in the fall, and you're saying that this is not really, you're not saying it's bad, but you're saying that there's lots of things where we need to improve on. So what do we do? I don't want to sacrifice my kid the first grade year, right? And I think there has to be something that we can tell our families in our community. What are the next steps? What do we do in the next 3 months? What do we do in the next 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? And how are we doing it slow, maybe slower than people might want, but I think it's more important to do it right, because it will be a bigger problem if we just take it all away. And then what do you do? Right? So I think the confidence for me, at least, comes from the fact that we have very competent teachers in our district that really, really care about making sure that our students are learning how to read and write and become strong and staying strong readers and writers. So I think, we're halfway there already, in my opinion. So, if you have any thoughts about how do we move forward in that, I know you mentioned, and I'm sure you'll have more detailed responses in the report, but if you have thoughts about looking at not trying to just let's just find the answer, just give me one name, what curriculum should we do? Instead of that, how do we do it right? What do we do in the next, again, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? And maybe that wasn't in the scope of your project, but.
Well, I will say, I just want to reiterate that I think thanks to the tremendous amount of support that this district puts in place for faculty, I think that most faculty are doing all the components, but again, a lot of times in their own way. So what we're recommending is that you move away from having individual teachers modify the curriculum to meet the needs of the students in front of them, which obviously can lead to inconsistency and is really hard for teachers to do, although your teachers are very happy to do it, but they're also carrying a heavy load, and instead, give them the curricula that kind of has it all in place. So, while it is certainly, every child and every day counts, right? Time is our one non-renewable resource. I do think you have really competent folks in place who are making modifications day to day, and what they described was really thoughtful. They're doing really great work. So when we talk to people about writing instruction, they had really great explanations of what they do to supplement writing. When we talk to folks about what do you do when a child is struggling, they had some answers, but we know that you want a really strong, consistent program across every classroom and every school. The faculty want that too. They work really hard to have consistency, but that's number one. The other thing I would say is that we can't write the timeline for you because we just don't know enough about, kind of the parameters you're working within. But I will say that in addition to writing the philosophy, writing is a really good place to start. There are approaches to writing that don't really require a commitment to a sequenced kind of manual of curriculum. And again, a little bit goes a long way in terms of developing writing skill at the sentence level. And I feel like we met a lot of people who would eat that up and would really know how to implement it. So in the process of making bigger decisions about reading curriculum, you may want to get folks going on writing. That'd probably be, where I would start. But again, without knowing all the ins and outs of what's going on in your district, I do think that you're really poised to kind of begin with some modifications to the approach to writing.
So,
Could I just
Yeah, of
add
course.
one thing? I wanted to also respond to your concern. What if you have a first grader coming in to the district in the fall? We want to say, we took time to look at student achievement data, and student achievement in your data is strong. You're an exemplary district. We saw the best example of direct instruction that we saw was in a first grade classroom doing a phonics first lesson. So this isn't sort of a 911 case where we think that the challenges that a rushed implementation would be worth the benefits of that. So I think what you could say to a parent of first graders is that students are getting what they need, and your hope in the district is that they could be getting even more and even better.
I have a first grader coming in, so.
Can I ask you? That was Matt's question.
Well, it sounds like part of what you're trying to do is sort of reduce the teacher burden a little bit and still get the same good outcome and maybe achieve some level of standardization. I think just definitionally, like alignment sometimes in your presentation sounds like standardization to me, but I know you mean more than that. So
Yeah, I would also
Yeah.
say, going back to the example of aligning, the 3 tiers of instruction, for example, it's like that will have a big impact for the most struggling. So that's a really good example of folks are working really, really hard to increase impact, but that kind of structural change, teachers can't account for that, reading specialists can't account for that, but if kids were getting the same consistent program across all the tiers, that would have a bigger.
they'd be helping each other year over year. Yeah.
Right.
Well, can you give us actually for the non-educators, can you just give us a little example of that, what the tier one, and when you say certain groups of students are getting tier one instruction on X, and then another group of children who are receiving intervention are getting tier two on X or Y. So can you just give us a little example so that people understand it a little more clearly? Because I do think that is key. That is one of the major issues that I would have as a classroom teacher if I was teaching.
Yeah, so when we say alignment rather than standardization, we really mean equity, just giving each student what they need. So not giving every student the same thing, that's what standardization would be, but not having student outcomes rely on, how much time a teacher spends outside of her classroom prep, preparing for the next day class. An example would be a first grader who goes to work with a reading specialist once a day, 1 period a day, would experience phonics first in the classroom, and then Foundations or LLI or Wilson or a different program in their outside resources. And the challenge that creates for that student is the cognitive load that there's already additional cognitive load. They have to change from one learning setting to another. But if they have to change the terminology, if they have to change the writing paper that they're using, if they have to change the manipulatives and the way they talk about how they're segmenting the sound, all of that puts an extra layer of cognitive load on your students who are struggling the most to learn how to read.
Well, also, I would think that in the flip side of that are the kids who don't receive the extra intervention services outside the classroom. And some kids have more strategies and more in their toolbox, and then others are limited. And if the teacher were to use a certain terminology in the classroom that some kids might have been exposed to and some kids might not have been exposed to, then it's confusing because nobody really knows what intervention or what strategy they should be using.
And I think that's fine for the student who already knows all of their phonics, that are in the classroom objectives for that day. But for the student where it's already hard to do that, it's an extra layer of challenge.
So one of the reasons why this is going to take time is because we had a committee that selected phonics first, and they looked at Foundations, which is the anchor program to the Wilson Level 1 intervention program that we was to. And so if we were going to make a shift like that, that wouldn't be something we would just decide ourselves. We'd work through a process with our faculty. But that's why the conversations around this will take time and are important, because we want to make sure that we are being very thoughtful about this, because we would be making adjustments to decisions that had already been previously made, and we might need to. So, looking forward to seeing the full report, I think that'll help guide those conversations.
I also think you can look at that as, again, it's still all phonics, and your faculty are really excited about having the program, so that change might not feel like as big of a change if you decide to make one. Certainly, they know the Phonics First program really well, and they're excited about using it, but if you decided to change that, it's still the same philosophical kind of components. It's all going to have same features to it. It's all Orton-Gillingham based. So there are consistent components to most research-based phonics programs versus, a reading program or a different approach to writing, which may feel like a heavier lift. So that's where I think the educators here in the district, again, really, I think would have a good handle on which things, are easier changes than others and how you kind of map that out over multiple years.
That's what I was going to,
Go ahead.
That's what I was going to ask you, is that it sounds like right now our teachers are doing a really good job, you know, building their own salad, so to speak, off the salad bar every day for every kid, like all these different, that's how we call that, patchwork of programs that we brought in. And then I heard you say that there is no great program that would cover all of these things. Someone should come up with that, but it doesn't seem to okay, but it doesn't seem to exist in this moment. So whatever we decide to change, it's still going to be a patchwork of programs, but you're just saying it would make our teachers' lives easier if they were more aligned, that the patchwork of programs were more worked better together versus having to sort of push apart the way they are right now. And I just feel like, as much as I want our program to be as great as it can be, I wonder if we're switching one problem situation for another problem situation, because we're going to get not just one new program, but 2 or 3 or 4 to sort of fill the holes again in a slightly better way. But there's a lot of PD that goes around that, and time and effort to get us to that place. And if it's going to be another hodgepodge of programs, like, is that better than what we have right now? I mean, I'm all for making our teachers' lives better, but I'm just.
I didn't understand it that way, but you
Yeah, I would say I welcome the opportunity to talk it through once you've had a chance to kind of see the whole report. Maybe the level of detail that we're able to provide now isn't helping you kind of see it in this way. I will kind of go back to 2 key things. One, you want to make sure that the core programs that you're using are all aligned with the same kind of philosophy and approach. And so right now,
They're not, right,
they're
totally.
not, number one. Number 2, it's about time. So Readers and Writers Workshop takes a tremendous amount of time, and over 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 again, I heard people say, there's no way I can do that all, and now I have lots of other things. So it's not so much about making teachers' lives easier, so much as making it at all manageable for them to do, for really high-performing people who really care about what they're doing and really want to meet the standards, to be able to put it all into place. Some people feel like they've got a handle on it. A lot of people, though, are modifying in ways that they're not even sure would be totally supported by their supervisors if they were sort of found out. So I think it's a lot more than just kind of making it easier. It's relieving kind of an impossible situation for folks, and really developing consistency and, again, equity, so that you're sure that everyone has a shared experience. One thing that we couldn't look at in this study, but we're very confident your district folks could, if they haven't already, is really looking at, for example, students year over year development and growth, especially those kids who are an individual group of children who are really struggling readers and writers. What does that trajectory look like? You want to make sure those kids are continuing to make growth and progress. And if it's really relying on, how well the teachers are able to modify, you're not going to get that kind of growth. So I think, again, maybe a better opportunity to kind of talk about it once you've seen the critique of every kind of component. But I think what we're talking about is fitting it together with fewer people a little bit more seamlessly. Right now, it feels to faculty like it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and they're left making choices between different components based on who's in front of them, and that's making it.
But the real reason to make the change is because the reading and writing units of study are not science reading. So if you were to change to a different program, would you still need to supplement? Yes. Would you need 2 or 3 or 4 programs? We don't actually think so.
Oh,
that there
that's
would be
great.
less gaps. The revised version, which you're using now, doesn't have a review on it. The original version. So it is a flawed program. So if you were to switch, you would still need supplementation, but we don't think it would be.
Oh, Scott, thanks.
Just,
Sorry.
well, the first thing I want to say is I want to thank you truly, because I think you created a really safe and honest space for our teachers. And I think what drew us to you initially was like having confidence that they would, you just alluded to it, feel that you were creating that space, having been in the classroom, that they can tell you exactly what they feel. And so I really appreciate that, because I'm sure you are as impressed with them as I generally am. Yeah, yeah. So I know you said you're obviously not going to define our literacy philosophy for us, although I wish you would. But no disrespect, Christina, not just saying. Um, and I get the alignment issue, but the only recommendation like you truly made here was to not continue with the units of study. So is it just an alignment issue, or is it like, it's not just an alignment issue? Right. Okay. And did you have that same opinion of it 3 years ago, let's say?
As experts in the science of reading, yes, we did.
Yes.
When we came into this project, we were aware of the district's high achievement.
Sure.
Lots of education, and that there was a real openness to making your own. So we were open to the possibility that maybe you had done something that no other district had done and figured out a way to make this study aligned to the science. And unfortunately, that wasn't. We found that the changes were also
which you didn't see. There's a lot of like structure that the leadership team has put in place to help folks figure out how to better align things. But I'm not sure that they have the bandwidth to even make sense of it all. I don't know. That's just my own hypothesis. That didn't bear out in the data at all. But I do think that, if there, even if there was like a structure that we could look at, that we could say, well, this is how everyone is modifying it the same way. That would have been something. What we're really seeing is that teacher autonomy, which is highly, highly valued in this district, and for good reason. Teachers are making, as a group or individuals, those kinds of decisions.
So I
And I
guess,
just have one more question, sorry, Hillary, about the writing component, because I see the stuff coming out of high achieving fourth and fifth graders in terms of writing. It's really not great. Is that universal, or is that, and would you attribute that to something, the way they've been taught, or, and how do we eradicate that?
Yeah, so not in at any moment, but really care deeply about writing. I think it's the best ways to develop cognition and executive functions, and when you have a really strong writing program across all departments or domains, it really benefits kids in extraordinary ways, including developing their reading. They go hand in hand, but the unit study just does not really focus on sentence level writing. So it really prioritizes volume. And so kids write a lot, but they don't write a lot really well. And then there's a lot of effort into revision, which again relies on teachers' time, teachers' capacity to give all of that feedback. So as you know, like we're all still getting better at writing at the sentence level. It's something that never ends. So, you teach kids specific skills and strategies. You help them understand grammar and mechanics. And the content is what makes those skills more sophisticated. So you can work at improving your sentence level writing in high school, the graduate level, because the content is kind of what makes it more sophisticated. So what I would say is that the program itself doesn't teach enough about systematic writing and strategies for improving writing. Improve kids' writing, also improve their oral speaking or reading again. So I think that's kind of component. That's the result of this particular approach to writing.
There's a real emphasis on oral language, and we saw a lot of teachers and students involved in deep dialogue with each other, and that is good, but it doesn't naturally translate into similarly high quality writing. So for students to take that rich oral language and translate it into writing, there needs to be instruction in between the students.
And one of the things that was really interesting, we did ask parents and guardians about tutoring, and while not as many folks had tutoring for reading or writing as we might have anticipated, 54% of respondents said that someone in their home, presumably a parent, a guardian, an adult caregiver, provides daily or weekly support for their child in writing. So
yes.
While people might not be investing, only 13% said they do weekly tutoring for writing, but 54% said somebody is helping either every day or some number of times a week with their children's writing at home. And that just doesn't need to be the case. So I do think that that's a sign that kids don't necessarily have the core skills and strategies that they need to be really kind of dependent, efficient writers.
So,
Sorry, go ahead.
okay, so then I keep hearing that our students perform well on state exams, our students do well on all of the other assessments that we give as a district. So why these recommendations? Like so is it the parent, guardian, adult helping each day daily that's allowing this, numbers to be high? And so, and again, not to just put all that emphasis, but someone can argue on the other side and say, well, our district is doing great because look at our numbers. So what would you say to that?
So we asked each other that question,
Oh.
and we also asked focus group participants that question. I think it's really tempting to say that students in your district are doing that well because of the readers and writers units of study.
Mm.
We didn't find evidence of that. Now, we couldn't have found evidence of that because there's so much supplementation happening. So we could also attribute their good performance on the supplementation that's happening, which some focus group participants do think that their theories, the theory of some of the teachers is that they are doing so well thanks to all of the extra work that teachers are doing to support grammar, to support mechanics, and a pretty significant amount of test prep as well.
Right. So I guess that also goes back to what we were talking about before, about that we don't rely on one curriculum to say, hey, this is the curriculum. This XYZ curriculum is giving us this data that's so wonderful, right? So we need to be careful about thinking that, because it's not just that. It's not as simple.
The teachers see that like very clearly, again, to paraphrase a participant, she said like, even the trainers from the writing and reading workshop sometimes give us supplementations that aren't in the workshop model. And like any good teacher just knows how to do this. And like, I know what my students need.
Right.
So I don't think the teachers would agree that you could attribute this to a specific curriculum. And we certainly couldn't find any systematic way that we could say it was this or it was that.
Right.
So, we didn't really look for attribution in that way,
Okay.
which, is not necessarily a bad thing in the sense that, again, like, there's lots of really smart people figuring things out, but you definitely want to have a lot more consistency and a better understanding. And I do think you have things in place to be able to assess the progress over time. NWEA as an assessment, it provides you a lot of data. You can do district-wide reports, like down to certain skill levels. So once you get a lot more consistency, you will be able to, look at progress and change over time at a very kind of micro level. But at this point, it's impossible to tell really whether it's the test prep, tutoring, parent support, teacher magic, or, any number of things. So you really, I would discourage you from kind of sitting back and saying, we're kind of doing okay enough, and, let's kind of keep things the same because change would be hard. We would really encourage you to think about, again, building on the momentum that you have in place. We know that this is a group of people who are not afraid to kind of dig in and do what needs to be done, and the leadership is there to make that happen. So we really hope you
Rip the Band-Aid off?
that came up a lot.
Yeah, okay.
That came up a lot as a direct quote. So yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm a teacher, so I guess I think like them, right? But I think, and that doesn't mean, again, overnight change the whole curriculum.
No, in fact, overnight I think would be detrimental in this
Yes.
case because it would be a lot of whiplash. And again, folks are, they are carrying the curriculum right now.
Yeah.
They have a good handle on what they're doing, and you really want to see change that's meaningful. I do think that as soon as you continue this process, teachers will begin implementing writing. Just who you have, they're not going to go to a single session or a single training and not start seeing, making the changes in their own classroom, but that doesn't mean that, you have to require a change right away. I think as soon as you start doing more professional development on components of the research in reading and writing, they're going to continue to modify and implement as they do really well. which is another, I think, case for why the professional development more generally and developing the philosophy before jumping to picking curricula is super important.
So I guess there are two things you mentioned that I kind of am curious to follow up. It's interesting what you said about the parent support. I don't know. I feel like in a way that it's being presented as the kids need this and this is why they're being successful. I guess at the younger grades, that I don't know, as a parent, I thought that's what we're supposed to be doing. Like, I don't know that I necessarily see that as a negative. Like, it would never occur to me to not, I mean, now my kid's older, I don't work with her every night, but like when she was little, I thought that was kind of what we were supposed to do as parents. So I guess that piece of data doesn't concern me necessarily that the kids need that necessarily so much as that's, I don't know, I thought that's what we're supposed to do. But, you know, one thing that I'm slightly concerned about how to finesse and manage moving forward is when you talked about that one thing that our teachers have here is a lot of teacher autonomy, and that's something that's important, I think, to us as a district, and I think to teachers, right? Like, so I think one thing that I'm a little bit concerned about moving forward is not losing that, so that whereas there are obviously problems with the way we've been doing this in terms of, you know, what I'm calling this patchwork model. One thing it is allowing teachers to do is find what works for them within these programs and to make that teaching in their classroom their own. And so I guess what I'm just curious about, because I don't know these other programs that you're not naming names of ones we should be picking, but will they allow our teachers to still have that like creativity and joy of teaching? Because I don't want to land with something that is so structured and so, you know, like today you're having the children write the letter A 14 times and then you're, you know, like I want to make sure. So as people have developed these programs that are aligned to the science of reading and do make sure that they're hitting the components that our kids need, do they still allow the teachers to have creativity within the process? And like, is there a way for us to know that we found one that does that?
I'm glad you're asking that because that came up as the fear from some teachers and administrators. There's, again, I would say a misconception that if you do something other than the units of study, teachers might be confined to reading from a script. And there are scripted programs, but we know that you wouldn't pick that type of program. In terms of autonomy and flexibility, teachers are always going to customize, right? Teachers know their group of students in their class best. What we want for them is for them to be able to customize a great program to be even better, rather than to have to customize a subpar program.
I would also add to that a couple of things. One, you know, when you walk into a humming classroom where phonics instruction is happening and it's direct, it's explicit, it's multisensory, everybody is doing the same thing. It is to some degree scripted, but it's beautiful because everyone's learning. And, you know, we had the opportunity to go through all of these classrooms and go class to class to class. And, you know, when we were walking through lessons where the whole class was learning together with the teacher using this research-based approach, like every child was engaged. It's just a different feeling than when you know the program is too loose. So again, I would, you know, there's autonomy and then there's like effectiveness, and I think that you guys know how to find that balance. But I do think that sometimes there's a misconception that you know, a highly kind of research-based approach is, you know, fun or whatever. Like kids feel great when they know what's happening in the classroom, when they have direction, when they have purpose, when they feel successful. Same thing with writing. Kids know when they're writing paragraphs of gobbledygook, like they feel the same way you do about it, I think, sometimes. And so while a direct explicit lesson on, you know, expanding sentences might seem, when you look at the manual, a little boring, teachers will make it magical and kids will feel incredibly empowered because they have a skill that they didn't have before. And that's that's much more important than kids, you know, feeling like they have a lot of freedom in the classroom or faculty feeling like, you know, they have to make 1,000 decisions a day. So I think you want to balance that kind of growth over just autonomy.
I think
I don't know, I feel like we're talking about explicit teaching and I'm not sure why that's like even a question. Like explicit teaching should be the basic foundation of education, no? And I don't want explicit teaching to be misinterpreted as too uptight or structured, because explicit teaching is going to help kids learn and help teachers teach better. I would think. So I think, I think just again, like, even as a parent of three kids here in this district, I think about what works and what works for all kids with all sorts of needs or not, right? Is that when you're explicit about something, it's understood. When we give explicit instruction to do something, whether it's reading or writing, or it's go pick up that piece of paper and put it in the garbage can, you know that you're going to have to go over there, walk over there, go pick it up and put it in the garbage can, not go move that piece of paper to another place. So I just feel that it's so fundamental and basic, yet we are like, oh, is this going to be like, okay? No, this must be okay and this must happen. And that's basic. That's why we keep using phonics as an example, because phonics is probably one of the only things that's very explicit right now, that people can sort of relate to and understand.
I also think another good example of autonomy is, again, providing faculty with an approach to writing. There are several that are research-based and sequential and begin at the sentence level and really emphasize executive function, but they're not specific programs where you follow the lesson. And so your teachers would make magic out of that, because they would start collaborating with, mixing the writing instruction between reading and social studies and implementing it into how children do lab reports and things like that. So that's where teachers get excited, not trying to figure out how to, teach children to read or reach those kids they just can't reach. The synergy and the excitement and the autonomy is they want that where it matters. And I think that's a really good example. So I think teachers will feel like they still have the capacity to personalize and to make this program their own. But we'll also feel, I think, a tremendous amount of relief from not kind of bearing the burden of making all of those decisions about when to be more direct and explicit.
So even though teachers didn't know necessarily what program we would end up with, you got the sense that there was buy-in in general across the board just to change it up because it's not working for them and it's such a hard ask for them right now to micromanage it.
Yeah, let me put it another way. We asked a survey question, how likely are you to recommend the current literacy program to a friend in another district? And that's a form of net promoter score. It was a negative 36. To be 100 to negative 100. So, there were only 6 respondents who would recommend the program. Now, it was a pretty narrow sample size, but not really that small.
Can you share how many responded?
There were 36 respondents, and so 30 of them said no. You were either detractors or neutral, but most of them were detractors. But more importantly,
It was a yes or no?
no, it's a scale.
Oh, it's a scale. Got it.
So you're only a promoter if you give it a 9 or a 10. So
Got
6
it.
people gave it a 9 or 10. Everyone else gave it
So-
below that.
Okay.
But when we talk to people, when we talk to family, again, there was a lot of consistency across what people were saying. It was pretty crystal clear, what folks feel like the challenges are. So that I think is really telling. I would also say that we didn't, get into the student survey as much. It was really representative. I think 1,500 kids filled it out. And they, while they love their teachers and they feel well supported, they also wish they had more support. So they didn't necessarily respond to multiple choice questions where they said they had to have support. For example, to complete their homework, they view themselves as good readers and writers, which I think has a lot to do with the culture here. Again, a very supportive environment, but when asked, do you wish you had more help with reading or writing at school? They said yes. A lot of them said yes across every grade level. So I think that's a pretty good example.
This was from K to
It was 3 to 9.
3 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
What I like
I would have
about-
loved to have
Oh.
had pulled the kindergartners.
So what I like about the frame here is that it really starts with us collectively determining what our philosophy is of literacy and then building upon that. And I think that's the right starting space for all of us to work with our teachers to figure that out and then move forward from there. So I appreciate the way that you frame this and just the understanding of the community that this is going to take time. Because as I'd like to connect back to what you said in the beginning of your presentation, districts that swung the other way are finding some real difficulty and challenges with making those decisions without being like thoughtful about that. And our performance gives us time to do the work in a way that we feel like change can be effective. But I appreciate that and the work that you've done with our faculty and our administration over your time here to kind of lay this out in a way that I think is helpful for us to even though it's not as specific, that in terms of timelines, because we'll develop those, but a good process for us to follow. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. It was really our pleasure. We really, we feel honored by the trust that you've put in us. We feel honored by the participation. We're really grateful to Adam and Alyssa and everybody on the, district level admin team who supported us through all of this. It really was a lovely experience and just a joy to work with everybody.
Before you go, I wanted to offer a chance for Adam to offer any reflection he might have, if he has one yet, to just on how this went and, where you think the path forward goes.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate the time that you spent in the district. We have been on the Zoom every week, providing data, going through, pieces of the results, that kind of thing. I will say that there were many pieces in here that I didn't find surprising at all. There were some things I did. There were some things that, I agree with completely, and other things I might challenge. But there will be time for that when we get the whole report and we can go through. It certainly gives us a different perspective, a fresh perspective, which I think is really important. There's so many questions that are swirling in kind of the larger context of education right now. We're getting more information day by day. New York State just released its new rubric for, I think it's K3, it might be K2, somebody can correct me that's just read it, for how a district would evaluate their literacy program. So that's like new information that we have and we can use as we look at other programs that our team didn't even have the luxury of having because it just got published. So, the things are shifting really quickly in that way. Some of the good news is we have a team that's been doing a lot of learning, our science reading team, and it sounds like they're open to we'll be open-minded about this work. And we also have processes as a district for selecting programs. We've done this, many times before, and equipped with this information and the new tools from the state, and other things. I think we can make some good recommendations for the board given the time. I will say, and maybe say it in a little bit of a different way than Dr. Ackerman say it, there are many districts that moved quickly, my colleagues, that are filled with regret, that feel like they looked at programs, they went and did site visits, they thought they were getting one thing, and then once they started to implement, they really got something different. And now you're seeing kind of this pendulum swinging around. They don't know what to do. They just adopted a program. They have all the professional development invested, the money in the program, and now they're thinking maybe that wasn't the right choice. So I think in this case, we try hard as a district to be kind of on the cutting edge. In this case, we were slowing ourselves down a little bit purposefully. I think that will pay dividends because there are many districts that are similar that are using different programs that we can learn from with regard to their implementation. I think that the last thing I'll say is, if I were you, I might be looking at me and wondering what I was doing. And the hard part for me in this, and it might be the hard part for you too, is with our literacy scores 3 through 8, according to state ed, we're ranked number 10 in the state. Number 10, not like 10%, like number 10. It puts us in the 99th percentile. And so that doesn't change anything that was presented, right? Like we have some real hard work to do, and we wouldn't be there if we weren't doing a lot of really hard work. But being in the 99th percentile, I think is partially because we have a program now that has the right tightness and the right looseness to it. There's like this Goldilocks zone in curriculum. And so when you have educators that are in a district for a long time and you have a commitment to a program, you provide like an arc of professional development over a long period of time, you need a program with some looseness to it. And there are other programs out there and perhaps some that are more like science of research aligned, but it would be a terrible mistake for us to move in a direction where we're not capitalizing on that like professionalism and expertise. There's a lot of districts that don't have that. They turn over teachers really quickly, they move between programs really quickly, and they can't take advantage of that looseness. The units of study do have a purposeful looseness built in, which a district, it's almost like a boutique kind of a experience where the teachers in Chappaqua can take advantage of that. But that doesn't take away from what we're hearing, which is it's too much. It's too much of an ask of our teachers. It's kind of, there's too much pressure around making those adjustments. So I'm excited to look at some other programs. I know you might have gotten more than you bargained for, turning the mic over to me. But I think we have a lot of work to do with regard to figuring out a value system around literacy that's not necessarily defined by units of study, and then leaning on, experts in-house, but also experts that we've built relationships with outside that are program agnostic, and making some hard decisions in a way that will, not kind of knock us off of this really high performing experience that we're having so far.
I'd
I do
also
think,
Oh, I'm sorry, Kelly.
I do think that also, I appreciate the whole looseness aspect of it, Adam, but I think it's important that we have to then define like how loose and in which areas you want to be loose in, right? So I think that is where we can start our work. And I do think that we don't want to, again, it'll be detrimental if we like change something overnight, but at the same time, taking time and going through the actual process of doing this right doesn't mean that it should also be really, really slow. That I think there has to be some balance in that, right? If we understand it and we acknowledge that there needs to be change. And also the other thing is, I know, Adam, you said we might be wondering, like, what have you been doing? And I don't think that's, I wouldn't say that. I think it's more about we have information that we committed to that we thought was the best choice for us, all of us at that moment. But now with more information and more learning and more willingness, and I think change is actually a sign of growth and understanding and learning. And so I see it as an opportunity. So I don't think like, well, what has Adam been doing all this time? I don't necessarily see it that way, but I do appreciate the reflectiveness of the administration on this process, because it's not easy when you have the test scores that show that we are 10, right? Ranked 10 in the country, or state. Oh, sorry, just, elevated us. But I think it's just important to know that we know where to go, we know where to start, and we just got to get to work. And
Yeah.
we don't want to be at any extreme, not too fast, but honestly not too slow either, because this is important. If kids can't read and write, they really can't do anything, right? So
I agree with you, Kaylee, completely. When I first arrived here, we were doing readers and writers workshop, and we kept adding, like, we need a phonics program, we need a grammar approach, we were trying to become more balanced, the whole ideology around balanced literacy. And so in working to do that, I think we were in, and then when the units of study were challenged, I'm going to say challenged, in terms of their alignment to the science of reading, which is the new movement in literacy education, I think it was a good moment for us to pause and to see how everything was working together. And I appreciate the understanding that our kids do very well, but I think we all realized this was a good time to hit the pause button and look at how everything was integrating. And what I'm hearing is that the integration isn't going as well as we would have hoped, and we can do better. And that is the next evolution of the program. And to Kaylee's point, it can't take forever, but it can't be too quick. And so we have to, we're looking forward to receiving your report and then working with our staff to analyze it and then begin the process of creating the foundation for what literacy should be like in this district. And then it is our responsibility to provide a timeline around that too, for the board, for the community, so they understand the pathway forward in that of our work. And so we are absolutely committed to doing that. And obviously we'll be engaging over the summer and immediately at the start of the school year.
thank you.
I feel like we got to give you a round of applause. So I want to express my deep gratitude for your and for your work with us and for sharing your thinking. And I look very much forward to your report, which we will place online. So we do that, and we'll let the community know when it's ready. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for.
Should we just reorient ourselves? And I think we're just going to move it. You guys can stand up. Well, I don't know. Josh is back. Okay, so first, we are getting ready to welcome our new assistant principal at Roaring Brook. And so I'd like Andrew to talk a little bit about our search process. As you know, Ross Cooper is moving on to become a principal. We wish him luck. And so we're in a position tonight where we're able to recommend a candidate for the board's consideration on the agenda. So Andrew?
Sure. Really happy to recommend Nadia Buffa for your consideration for assistant principal at Roaring Brook Elementary School. Nadia's been an ENL teacher in the district since 2018. Before that, she was a classroom elementary teacher. She's had a number of leadership positions, ENL department chair, ENL mentor teacher, grade level leader. She's on the research-based literacy team. She's done a lot of professional development for our teachers over time, synchronous small group instruction, culturally responsive teaching book club, elevating student choice through stations. It goes on and on. We're really happy. Our search process, we reviewed over 140 resumes for the position. It was a full search, internal and external search. From that, we conducted screening interviews for 23 candidates, external and internal. From there, into another committee interview, 7 teachers and then our candidates, and finally then brought 3 to a committee at the building level, included parents, included teachers, administrators, and a student representation too, which I'm pretty used to doing at the high school and middle school level, but it was actually fantastic to do this at the elementary level and have 4th grader there. Was the highlight of the whole process. So we feel really really confident and great about this recommendation to you, and look forward to her work in the district continuing.
Andrew, and now I just want to share with the board that we've gone through an extensive process this year to create our student literacies, which is aligned with the district strategic plan, where we went from moving from a profile of a Greeley graduate to a different model to better encompass the work that we're doing throughout the district, K through 12. And so these literacies were developed by the district equity team, and then they were refined by the CARES committee, by our full staff, and then the full community. We had sent them out, and we continued to revise them, and then the district equity team finalized the revisions at our last meeting. And so the literacies are based in different aspects of our work with our children. So they're global literacy, linguistic literacy, digital literacy, artistic literacy, quantitative literacy, scientific literacy, and wellness literacy. And we'll send this out to our families in the week just so they can have an understanding of the finalized version of this, because this won't be the first time that they saw it. And then we plan on using this as we plan forward with our teachers about what we're trying to accomplish in our school district. Right, so now I'm going to move it over to Josh, because also we are getting ready to study 2 important components of our strategic plan around the elementary level and the middle level. And so you can see up there, I took slices of the plan out just to have it on the presentation. And this is specific to whether or not we need to rezone our elementary schools and if we should reconfigure our middle schools. So the board had gone through an RFP process, which Josh was anchored for us at the district level. So I want him to just share a little bit about the consultant that we've selected to do this work with us moving forward. So go ahead, Josh.
Sure. So we're contracting with Dr. Ross Haber. He has done studies on Princeton plan models and demographic studies, as well as facility studies and attendance zone studies in school districts throughout New York State, most recently in North Syracuse and Rome, New York. He is someone who is a self-described data head. He is going to take all of the data that we provide with him and come up with forecast models of our enrollment, and then also looking at our zoning and looking at our attendance lines to see, and also to see if a Princeton plan is a financially and educationally feasible model for us to move towards in our middle schools.
Okay, so now the other big item on our agenda, and we had been talking about this previously, we are going to move forward with our pre-K pilot. And we're going to do this using grant money allocated to us from the state ed department and run this through the Grafflin Annex. And we're able to partner with Healthy Kids. They run pre-K programming in other school districts, and they also do our aftercare and before care services here in Roaring Brook and in West Orchard. And they have agreed to partner with us through the RFP process to be our pre-K providers next year, which we will run out of the Grafflin Annex. So this will be a no-cost program for our parents. We plan on running it from 9 to 2, and they will also do paid before and after care, just like they do right now at our elementary buildings. And so Adam is going to spearhead this for the district as we begin to start the process of rolling this out. We don't anticipate we'd be able to start right in the beginning of September because there's a lot of approvals that we need to move through, but we are going to start launching and getting ready to assess interest as early as tomorrow if the board moves forward with approving the RFP. And the board had met with Healthy Kids about their potential partnership with us already. So we're at the point now where we feel comfortable moving forward. Right, so there'll be some supplemental supplies and materials that we'll probably need to either move around through reduced courses, like reduced sectioning in kindergarten to support this, but the bulk of the costs associated with this is generated from state ed. Well, like if we have some kindergarten classes that we may not run all of the sections next year based on enrollment, so we may use some of the books that are in there. We may use some of the furniture and place it in this space. So I don't want to say there wouldn't be any district costs associated with this, but the bulk of the costs associated with the program will be generated from the grant. Is that a fair, Josh?
Yeah, and so just this 194,401 is the exact amount of the reimbursement from the state. So this is a grant-funded line item that we're approving tonight. This would be to cover about 40 pre-K students. In there, we have to look at the exact dimensions of the classrooms to see how many we could accommodate once we get the approval of that. So that's going to dictate that. But the 194,401 is the division of about 36 to 40 students in the grant process.
Christine, did you just say you don't think it will start for September? I didn't.
We're going to try to be ready for that, but there are approvals that need to happen through Westchester and outside agencies I'm not sure.
Okay.
Sure. Did you get a sense of that from speaking with them recently?
Yeah, right now we have a timeline mapped out. So we're ready to go as of the kind of beginning of school, but we're not sure we're going to get all the approvals in time. Some of those are out of our hands with regard to preschool program approvals. Are expedited when a school district oversees the program, which is nice. We've already provided that letter. It's kind of waiting for the board vote tonight, and then that'll go to them. But yeah, we could be held up with some of the bureaucracy of approvals. They do a site visit, they check your site, and eventually approve it as a preschool. The good news for us is we had a previous program in there, a preschool program, a Head Start program that was based out of Mount Kisco, and so we don't have any like concerns about that being approved, but we still have to go through the steps.
And it's a lottery for who can get in.
If we have exceeded enrollment.
Right.
Yes.
That's in 2 classrooms. Right, and so this is all about the ratio, the size of the rooms, and the amount of adults that would be with each one of them that we're just waiting for.
They'd each have a lead teacher and an assistant teacher, so 2 adults.
And even if families are not zoned for Grafflin, it's anyone in CCSD who could be a part of it.
Yes. Okay, so Adam, do you want to go over the grants on the agenda?
Yeah, so we have one grant. This is a CSF Insta grant. Thanks to the CSF for, you'll see it on 5.6, Grafflin outdoor seating. So the neat part of this grant, not only are we going to get some picnic tables, but this was actually part of a persuasive writing assignment for the students. So they did some persuasive writing and it paid dividends for them. They're going to get some spaces. So this was generated by the kids and they're going to see the impact of their persuasive writing. So we thought that was pretty neat. So thanks for the CSF for participating with our curriculum and making it real for the
Adam,
kids.
my daughter's interested in vending machines. Can we go down the same road?
You,
or
you
not?
might have to write persuasive writing. We'll
Yeah,
see. Yeah, that's
yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit, that's a little bit more difficult to do. And then the next two are actually gifts. They're not from the CSF, they're from the PTA. So 5.12, you'll see the Grafflin PTA has a gift that they'd like you to approve for $2,000 to purchase some bins that are also double as benches. That's not the exact bench there. I didn't have a picture of the exact one, but you get the idea. We'll put the sports equipment on the inside. It pays for some of the sports equipment as well as the storage. And then you can see for Bell, the PTA would like to fund Pop a Shot for $640. And those, we actually have those over at Seven Bridges and they're very popular. And so we're going to get a couple over at Bell so the students can use them.
So I just wanted to share this as our last report regarding our incidents that happen across the district that are that we need to address that involve hate speech, bias, or discrimination for fourth quarter. And we have talked as a board, and I'll be working with the policy committee to see if there's a different way for us to share this information moving forward into next year. And that was also something we spoke about with the DET as in terms of like what information should we be sharing, and should we be sharing the work that we're doing differently over the course of the school year, and not necessarily providing these aggregate reports that don't really have that much information within them. So this is some of the work that we'll be talking about over the summer and then sharing with the board before the start of the school year. And then just finally, I want to recognize and congratulate all of our Horace Greeley High School graduates. We did have a fantastic moving up ceremony. I want to thank the high school team for facilitating that for the district. And then I just want to acknowledge that tomorrow are our moving up ceremonies. We've had to make some adjustments because of the heat that are for our middle school ceremonies in the afternoon, because the heat index is predicted to be, or the real feel will be too high at the time of the ceremonies. But I do now want to take a moment to thank all of our faculty and staff who've been working in the buildings the past 2 days and for facilitating the movement between classrooms and the cooling centers. It's not easy to do all of that and keep the learning going. So I do want to recognize our staff, particularly our K staff, since our high school is testing. Next week, we move into our early dismissals. Both the middle schools and the elementaries are early dismissing for different reasons. And then we have a board meeting on the 25th, and then the last day of school is next Wednesday. And then our next full business meeting for the Board of Education is on July 8th. And that is the end of the superintendent's report.
Firstly, for the sports boosters, their end of year bash was wildly successful, both in raising money, and I know Kaylee and Christine can attest. I think everybody had a really great time. Also, did you go too? Oh, okay.
Adam did.
Oh, sorry, Adam. Did you have a good time? Great. Okay. And lastly, their final meeting was on Tuesday, and they were able to finalize a grant for $3,600 to get trainers to train the incoming 9th graders to 12th graders who are trying out for the soccer team. So I think that's really cool. And that's just an upshot of being able to raise money, and it's for a great cause. And I just want to thank Julie Balber, who is the chair of that committee. She does a great job, and she really is a tireless worker. So I think she really supports all of our athletes in a great way. And I wasn't able to attend as many of the meetings as I would have liked, but I am in constant contact with Julie, and I think she just does a wonderful job. So that's it. That's all I got.
welcome public comments, and in respect for each other's time, we ask that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. Board members may also be contacted via email or phone. After the public comment period has been completed, board members may have a discussion amongst themselves regarding comments presented. So if you'd like to make a public comment.
Hi, my name is Barrett Flom, and I am a parent of a first grader in the district. So I would like to take this opportunity after hearing the report. I can't wait to read the full length of the report. And while I appreciate methodical, thought out processes, I would emphasize the importance of moving forward expeditiously with getting rid of TC units of study. My son and his peers only have 2 more years as first graders, soon to be second graders, to learn to read. Because after the 3rd grade, you need to read to learn. And while we have excellent scores in the district, I think that we could have better scores. And I think that those excellent scores sometimes forget the students who aren't doing well. And we can't forget those because all the students will do well with a new program and we can just do better. So we already knew a year ago. We knew, as Matt alluded to, we knew 3 years ago. Teachers College was in the program. Let's move on. Thank you.
Okay, that ends the public comment period. Does anybody want to say anything? Okay. That brings us to approvals and ratifications. Can I have a motion, please, for 3.1 and 3.2 together, please? That is the minutes of the June 11th, 2024 and June 18th, 2024 meetings.
I move.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
I recommend 4.1 instructional as presented.
Move that we move 4.1 as presented.
I will second that. Any questions? All in favor?
I recommend 4.2 non-instructional as presented.
I'll move that we accept superintendent's recommendations under 4.2 as presented.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
That brings us to 5, which is the consent agenda. The use of the consent agenda permits the Board of Education to make more effective use of its time by adopting a single motion to cover those relatively routine matters which are included. Any member of the board who wishes to discuss individually a particular piece of business on the consent agenda may so indicate, and that item will be considered and voted on separately, thus preserving the right of all board members to be heard on any issue. So tonight's consent agenda is 5.1 through 5.22. As a preliminary matter, is there anything that any board member wants to remove from the consent agenda?
Yes. I think we need to, in thinking about what we just heard from the literacy review consultants, I think we need to remove 5.10 and 5.15.
Okay, so are you moving to remove 5.10 and 5.15?
I will move to remove 5.10 and 5.15.
Okay, I will second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so why don't we look at the rest of the consent agenda first, and then we'll look at 5.10 and 5.15?
Yes.
Okay. So can I have a motion for 5.1 through 5.9, 5.11 through 5.14, and 5.16 through 5.22? All right, I'll move.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll second that. Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on any of those numbers?
Yes. I know that we talked about a little bit, but if Adam, I think Adam, you might know the answer to this. Items 5.3, 5.4, 5.5, the resolutions to certified lead evaluators and recertified lead evaluators. If you can just kind of go over the process and why we have administrators and then we have some outside people doing that. And then the next thing would be also why we are certifying at the end of the school year versus at the beginning, when it should. So if there's a rule about that.
Yeah, I think I can help with that one. So in the state of New York, all districts are required to have an approved APPR plan.
Yes.
And that plan is about 60 pages long, from a template that New York State sends us. It needs to be negotiated with the Teachers Association, Administrators Association. The superintendent needs to sign off, the school board needs to approve it, and the other presidents need to approve it as well. So our plan was modified in 2021 to add the Danielson rubric. Before we had kind of a homegrown Chappaqua rubric. So the Danielson rubric is a new rubric. That was one of the adjustments that we made. And as part of that plan, you need to have a process for certifying your evaluators. And our plan is written in a way that professional development happens throughout the course of the year. It prescribes things that are going to happen, peer review of observations, learning walks, things like that happen throughout the course of the year. I don't know if the state would approve a plan that didn't have that professional development running through the course of the year, but we're basically certifying that we've run that course of professional learning with administrators through the course of the year, and that we're now ready to certify them. So that's what we've done for the last several years.
So is that best practice for lots of districts? Because I would think, or can you separate those two out to say that this is what we're going to do throughout the course of the year, but like we're basically allowing people that we didn't technically approve individually to evaluate until they've already evaluated. So how does that work?
Yeah, so I guess I would say that.
I mean, outside of like the building principals and assistant principals and superintendents, how would that?
Yeah, so all of the outside consultants have contracts that say that you're approving them to evaluate, or that Dr. Ackerman is, depending on the amount of the amount that's there. They're not certified as evaluators, but they are contracted to evaluate. So
Okay.
One of these contractors we had doing some executive coaching, we needed her to do a teacher evaluation. So we actually had a separate agreement that you all approved to certify this, not certify them as a lead evaluator, but it's a contract with them as a consultant to provide and conduct an evaluation. We haven't done this with any outside consultants that were not experienced administrators in other districts that had as like a core part of their job that evaluation. These folks on here are principals and a former superintendent. So they're pretty experienced when it comes to evaluating teachers. It's an important thing. And so we want to make sure that they have that kind of standard of back experience and training. For our administrators, when we hire them as administrators, they do need to be trained to be certified by the board, but the expectation is as part of their training and certification to be administrators that they're, proficient at evaluating staff.
Okay, thank you.
No.
All in favor?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, so it's 5.10, Board of Education hereby approves an agreement services with Gravity Goldberg for literacy, professional development, and curriculum support during the 24-25 school year. And then it goes into the amount. I'm just wondering if we should be committing to a particular consultant of literacy right now while we are still undergoing the evaluation and sort of figuring out what are our next steps, particularly because Gravity Goldberg is or was very heavily tied to Teachers College, and not to be a TC hater because I'm a product of them also and training. And so, but just to be mindful of that because we had gotten, comments about, and I understand the concerns behind that. And I believe our consultants also said to think about, we can't be anti-TC people. That was the premier school of education for people who wanted to be educators. So it's not to say anybody who went to TC is now nixed our consideration, but just to be mindful. And it might well be back up here, and that would be okay. But I am sort of, I have reservations myself just because we are in the process right now. And to have outside consultants who are heavily, they're no longer there. And I know they've done some good work throughout the district for us this past year, but just knowing that, I think it's something that we want to think about before just rushing into committing a certain dollar amount for that. And that would be the same for 5.15.
I just have a question. The way this reads, though, are we committed to zero? We are, right? Okay. It's not to exceed a certain amount, but we're not necessarily committed to any dollar figure or utilization of them at all. Is that correct, Adam?
Yeah, these are up to contracts. I double
Right.
checked. This was the first I had heard from our consultants, the part about, the concerns with regard to people with ties to TC. Typically, these contracts, these big contracts for consultants that we've worked with for years go on the agenda after the budget passes. So we've held them until the vote. And so that's why they're here. It just happened to be the same day as the literacy presentation. And so I too, as soon as they said that, I went back and I checked the contracts to make sure that they were up to contracts. But at the same time, I think in fairness to the consultants, they are like in demand, pretty significant demand. And so we usually like commit to those dates, even though for us it's an up to and we could potentially change course. I don't know that I'd want to go into this thinking we wouldn't use those days because they would give those days to other districts. And now's the time of year where they kind of fill up their calendars. And so that's, if you do choose to approve it, those days are up to days. If we decided we're going to head in a different direction, we certainly could. I'll also say that both of these consultants have left TC or not
Yes.
part of TC.
Yes.
They're program agnostic. They support
Right.
districts with other programs, not just TC districts. And they've also both done pretty extensive work around the science of reading, and they've been advisors to me and us as a district. I think they could be really important advisors to help us think about. They're working in other districts that have adopted other
Right.
programs and have made the transition, and they could be a big part of that. The change last year was really in large part so we could kind of create some separation with what is now advancing literacy. And so we didn't go with those standard professional developers, but we did need someone that could come in and speak the language that our faculty is speaking and understood the units and the programs. But they are not, I think I can speak for them when I say they are not tied to units of study. They wouldn't advise that we necessarily stay with units of study if we as a district wanted to look at other or chose to look at other units.
So I guess my concern is not necessarily the dollar, like the specific that it will not to exceed, but it's the consultant company themselves, whether it's Gravity Goldberg or Shina Shorts, and item 5.15. And again, I'm not saying that this shouldn't be, but I think that it warrants more of a conversation than just discussing it right here for 5 minutes. Because it is something that we should consider in thinking about how many consultants we want to have in the district for literacy and for how long and for how much and for what reasons and what specific type of work. Before we even have that scaffolded out or even thought about in terms of what changes we want to make and if they can provide those services or not, just to say let's approve this because their slots are going to get filled up is, I don't think, fair for our process, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion.
Adam,
guess-
go ahead, Hillary.
I guess the question I have is, do you feel that we're going to need the support of outside consultants as sort of literacy PD? And do you feel like we're at a place, I guess my thought is if you say that this is what you need to be able to make sure our teachers are prepared to teach come fall, then that's fine, even though we're going to be reviewing what it is that we're using. I don't know when over the course of the year, you plan to implement this PD.
I guess my only reservation would be implementing PD on a program that we're potentially changing. But we also probably are not going to have changed it by September. So if we feel like our teachers are going to need the support to be where they need to be come September, I don't want to not give them what they need to be successful at the beginning of the school year, because we know that we're going to be looking into making a change. So I think that's kind of the balance of it is, you know, I don't feel like it's my area of expertise or even my job to know what like they're going to need in terms of being supported. So I don't want to say we shouldn't do it if we feel like that's what our teachers need. But I do think that if we're thinking, and I'm not super concerned that they have like the ties to TC in a vacuum, because until we make a change, we are still using some of that. And I want our teachers to be able to have what they need. But I also think we should think about how much of this we do draw on as we may want to make changes as we change our program.
I'm also not concerned that they have necessarily like allegiance to TC, and that's, even though they're not TC consultants, that they will go back to something that they would recognize to be flawed pedagogically. I am just more, I want to just be more mindful about the fact that if we are going to provide professional development on literacy, that again, it won't be now, well, we had them because we are using the TC model, but they're not really, that's not what they're there for, right? So I'm just trying to say that this is, if we're providing professional development for our faculty, then it should be based on what we decide that we are going to do moving forward, even in the small changes, right? Because then it's sort of like you can tailor that to which consultants that you want to have in the buildings. So I would not, that's how I feel about it. Again, I'm not the assistant superintendent of curriculum, but I think we're okay if we don't agree.
Yeah, can I just share just a few other things to think about? I believe, and I don't want to speak for our evaluators of our program, but both of them had pretty significant ties to TC, right?
Right.
And so I know that last year we didn't contract with TC to do the professional development, we shifted. And so this is a result of that shift.
Right.
And so those are things I'm thinking about. I'm also thinking about, we just crafted a budget where we eliminated the director of elementary education and we reduced the team by 2. So I am a little concerned about that as well, and making sure that we can continue the work that we need to do. And so these contracts allow us to do that, but I understand the concerns that Kelly's raising as well. So I just want people to have that information as we try to figure out what the next best step is for us. I do feel like if we don't move forward tonight and we wait to July 8th, we may not have the opportunity to work with these 2 professional developers here who've already established their relationship with us and understand our programs and our faculty. So that's just something we need to think about as well. But I also know there's probably other professional developers that would want to come and work with us. I'm not sure. Like, I think our work is around shifting and strengthening our programs for our kids. So, you know, whether it's the consultants on the agenda or someone else that we now decide to work with moving forward, I think maybe the end would be the same both scenarios. So that's something to think about it.
I also just don't want to be in the same position as where, you know, I think it was, I don't know, it's not this past spring, but the spring before, where we did purchase the revised units of study for K-2, and soon after we were, I don't want to say that we're regretting it, but we wanted to take another look at that, right? And are we going to then now buy the revised units of 3 to 5, right? So I don't want to be in that same situation with the consultants where we have approved this and said, okay, the teachers need support and obviously should get support, but without knowing exactly what type of support moving forward, it's just, to me, I think a larger conversation is warranted. But again, I don't need to, keep saying that because I think you guys all understand what I'm trying to say.
Adam, is it these consultants more in kind of an implementation sort of frame, or could they also be helpful in the sort of philosophy conversation that we were talking about? Like, is there an avenue to make use of them in a way that's more agnostic to program? Is that the thinking behind having them ready now, or are we talking about maybe more down on the ground fundamentals here?
Yeah, so I think tonight's presentation really changes things for us as a district, right? So I think they could be really good thinking partners to help us guide and even for them to lead some of the work around creating that kind of philosophy, but also with our Science of Reading team to do some work with them with regard to how to evaluate programs, how other districts evaluate programs. They're tied in. Their full-time work is to work in districts, many of which are high-performing districts in this region, and they can share with us, kind of cross-pollinate ideas across districts with regard to other districts that have led this way. They are a connection in that way, so they can bring tools, bring information, share with us, potential pitfalls that other districts have kind of fallen into with regard to those things. So we're going to have to do some thinking about if you do choose to approve it, do some thinking about how best to deploy them with regard to kind of the report that we're going to get and the timeline that we map out, and perhaps they could even advise us on what they think is a responsible timeline. But they are, high level they may not be the right fit for us. I happen to think they are. They're sought after agnostic professional developers in the area that are known to us, known to our teachers, and they're highly respected among our faculty. And so I don't think that now would be the right time to pull them out and not have them as a real resource for us as we do some of the probably the most challenging literacy work that we've done in many years over the next year.
So that's great.
Presentation tonight, you would like us to still approve these?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And you said it's an up to contract for both of them. So if we change our minds halfway through the year, whatever, we're not committing ourselves to definitely spending the money. Just leaving ourselves the option.
That's right.
Well, I guess we take them each separately. So we've moved 5.1 out. We've had the conversation on both, but we've only moved 5.1 out. Sure. So all in favor of 5.1 out, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Then I will move 5.15. Can I have a second?
Second.
Do we want any further conversation, or was it really the same conversation? Okay, so all in favor of 5.15, vote aye.
Aye.
All opposed, vote nay. So I think then we've covered all of the fives, right, Lisa? I just don't want to mess this up. All right. So that brings us to item 6.1. 6.1 is acknowledging the contract previously approved by the superintendent under board policy 6085. 6.1 is a letter of agreement with the Upright Citizens Brigade for professional development at the administrative retreat. Can I have a motion, please, for 6.1?
Moved.
Second. Any questions or concerns? All in favor? 7. That brings us to 8. Can I have a motion, please, to take 8.1 through 8.4 together? That's acknowledging receipt of the claims auditor report for May of 2024, acknowledging receipt of the treasurer's report for May of 2024, acknowledging receipt of the appropriation status report for May of 2024, and acknowledging receipt of the revenue status report for May of 2024. Anyone move?
Sure. Yeah, I will leave that one.
I get a second?
Second.
Questions or concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. That brings us to notice of future meetings. We have a meeting here next, no, not here, at the Ed Center at 1:30 on Tuesday. And then our reorg meeting for the next school year will be Monday, July 8th at 7 p.m. back in the auditorium, although we'll see, we may be here. We'll be in this building somewhere. Stay tuned. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please, at 9:29 p.m.?
Move.
One second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned. Have a wonderful summer, everybody.